myself. Oh no, give me that sound. Oh, I gotta go like Cobain. 8 years to the grave, gone insane. My blood got propane. How you gon' go and throw my name with shame? Already cross-faded, making it to the disco. I hate it, and you know how this goes. You framed it, picture painted in my room. This that real life shit, none of Zoom, got the scene in it.
Make sure you're subscribed to JerCrispy.
What's up, y'all? Show us the most, does the most. JerCrispy, welcome back to another video. What if Light had the Greasy or Greasol? I don't know if I'm saying that stuff right or not. But she like, comment, subscribe, follow social media. It's gonna pop on the screen. We're on the road to 500. We're on the road to 500, and let's get it.
What if instead of the Death Note, Light Yagami received the Geass instead from Code Geass? How would this change the story? Would he have an easier or harder time winning? Or does he just get stomped by L's godly intuition? Before we get into the what if, we need to lay out the terms and conditions. The first term is, Light's character, goals, and motivations all remain the same in this what if. The only difference is that he has the Geass, the power of the king. The next term is, Light will still have Ryuk, just without the Death Note, obviously, because you can't have Death Note and not Ryuk. The winning conditions are, Light has to take over the world to win. This is obvious as this was his plan in the original series. However, to do that, he needs to defeat L. Just because Light would get Geass doesn't mean his character changes and he hides away to kill people. Eventually, he'll have to defeat Nier and Mello once they resurface years down the line. If Light is able to successfully beat all of these individuals, he wins. Now, if Light is convicted of being Kira, he loses. If he's arrested but is able to escape imprisonment without being convicted under a jury, it won't count as a loss. If Light dies, it would technically count as defeat, but in the eyes of L, he'd see it as a loss since he wants to prove Light is Kira while he's alive. So whether or not you count Light having to possibly off himself in order to beat L in the end as a win.
Low key, I fuck with Death Note heavy like a motherfucker, bro. And I feel like if they did some shit like this, bro, this would low key bring it more interesting to it. I ain't gonna hold you. Death Note is something you could always go back and watch.
Or loss is totally up to you. By the way, guys, if you got any ideas for future YouTube videos, drop them in the Discord.
Reddit. Go ahead.
So make sure to join. Now, without further ado,
link below in the YouTube
in this
channel.
scenario, everything plays out the same, except Light never sees the notebook fall from the sky. After a long day of school, he comes home to find Ryuk waiting for him. He freaks out but calms down once Ryuk talks to him about how bored he is. He then casually reveals he gave Light a Geass, giving him the power to command anyone. He tells Light to try it out if he doesn't believe him, so Light decides to do just that. In order to avoid the worst possible scenario, he refrains from using it on Sayu or his mother Sachiko, and instead heads to the city. I don't think he'd outright order someone to die, but maybe he'd do something like order a store clerk to give him a magazine or a bag of chips for free. Something harmless that just allows him to test out Geass without losing his life or being convicted. At most, it would take less than a few tries for Light to be convinced, and there's also the fact that he's now being followed by a god of death. Or in this case, a god of Geass? The sea? I don't know. Something like that. Also, I do want to mention one thing that I did forget to mention, but it's also still important here as he's trying out the Geass. The reason why it's the power to control people, it's literally similar to Lelouch because they pretty much have the same goals of taking over, etc, etc. And the Geass manifests from a person's true unconscious desires, what they really need. So for C2, it was love, so her Geass was for people to fall in love. So for Light, it kind of makes sense as he is some weird control freak usually. Anyways, after being convinced, he'd immediately return home and ask Ryuk more questions, such as whether or not this power has a limit, does he owe Ryuk anything, etc. Once Light has all the info he needs, he'd make the same statement as he did in the first episode, though instead of the notebook, he plans to use the Geass to create a new world, one free of criminals. But the question is, can Light actually do it with just Geass? Well, it's actually a bit iffy to outright
I gotta watch the show to see if he can actually do that. I should have just, like, stuff like this, I be seeing content. I should be like, watch the show first, and then do this. But, you know, it's what it is.
Say this, Geass requires the user to be in close proximity with the intended target. Not to mention, eye contact has to be made. The biggest advantage with the notebook was the fact that Light could chill at home and kill indiscriminately. Although Light no longer needs a name or a face, he needs to be physically present. If Light is at the site of every murder, it's only a matter of time before he's caught, arguably before L even catches on to him. It might not even get as as far as to where Elle is aware of a killer going around and ordering people into cardiac arrest or offing themselves. Because if you remember correctly, at the start of Death Note, the only reason Kira became a worldwide phenomena is because of the large killing spree. Whereas here, it's going to take way more time as he has to be physically present, as we stated. The reason why Light being at every crime scene is bad is because CCTV cameras still existed at this time, and although they weren't as widespread or efficient as they are in today's age, there were still cameras present in Japan. Even if Light wore a different outfit each time or was able to wear a mask, the police would at least know his ideal build, height, and the times at which he operates. So right from the start, it's pretty clear that Light having Geass would give him a way worse and harder time than if he just kept the notebook. However, it isn't over for Light yet. There are two possible outcomes that could happen in this what if. Let's start with outcome A. Outcome A is a very big headcanon one, but you know, what ifs usually are. Light realizes how difficult it is to use Geass to rid the world of criminals, and so he decides to just sit back and keep on living, until he either finds an opportunity or can come up with a better plan. It would take 4 months until chronologically, Misa would gain a notebook from Rem. Just because Light doesn't have a death note in this what if, doesn't mean death notes just no longer exist. But it just really depends on whether or not Misa would have the conviction to even become Kira. Honestly, I'd say no. She was more so a follower, someone obsessed with Light and whatever he planned. Misa would use the notebook to kill the criminal who murdered her parents and possibly a few others. Assuming she just kills strictly off heart attacks, this would make its way to the news and Light would immediately pick up on this. He'd question Ryuk about it, and I believe Ryuk would confirm his suspicions, or at the very least hint to it. Ryuk did make it clear that he was on nobody's side, but answering a question of Light's is pretty harmless. Now, where is L in this scenario? Would he attempt to figure out who this heart attack killer is? Well, actually no. L only gets involved in cases with either 10 victims or $1 million on the line. I really can't see the possibility of Misa killing over 10 people in a single day, and it's arguable that she would even kill more after ridding the world of her parents' murderers. With that, Light would be free to immediately investigate this so-called heart attack killer, with only the Japanese police as his main competitor. But they are literal infants compared to Light. All he'd have to do is research the criminal that was killed and figure out his crimes, followed by connecting the dots. He'd realize that they were involved in the killings of a famous model and actress known as Misa Amane's caretakers. It wouldn't even matter if Light figured this out before or after the police, as assuming they are competent enough to question her, they have virtually zero evidence to use against Misa. She could just give Rem the notebook to hide, and even if they come to question her, how would Misa have given her parents' killer a heart attack all the way from home? She has a motive, but there's no evidence, so the case would be dismissed. Either way, Light would figure out that Misa is the killer and he'd have to make contact with her. He could do this in a number of ways, but he'd most likely send her an email or letter that alludes to him knowing about her power. Misa gets a lot of fan mails and emails, so Light's message would be buried amongst tons of others. He could also just figure out Misa's address and stroll right over to her house or stalk her for a bit and figure out her location before making contact in person. Whatever method he chooses, he'll be able to get in contact with Misa, especially once she figures out who Light is. In canon, Misa originally wanted to find and meet Kira to express her gratitude, but her goals shifted once she figured out his identity. Light would approach Misa and explain he knows about her notebook, followed by informing her of his desire to change the world and to free the world of criminals, like the ones who murdered her parents. Misa would immediately accept Light's proposal, and the series would start off from there. There's your headcanon, we gotta make it work. However, before we continue, we need to establish something. Can Light use the notebook now that he has Misa's? Well, to keep this interesting, we'll say that Light can't. It would be pretty cheap if we made a video on Light having Geass, and as a loophole,
because then that'd be overpowered if he got Geass and he got the death note. If he got the death note, cause that's definitely overpowered right there. Cause he already got the Geass. All you gotta do is just look at somebody and hypnotizing like that. I'm learning about something, a little bit about the Geass, man. You know, you boy learning about something, little something, little something. But yeah, that'd probably be overpowered for him if he do get the Geass in the book. So yeah.
So for whatever reason, Light is just unable to use the notebook, and only other people can. Light honestly wouldn't have to use his Geass on Misa to get her to obey him, as she would already be incredibly obsessed and devoted to Light, especially with his ideology or whatever. Eventually, the mass killings conducted by Misa would alert the attention of the FBI, and eventually L. From here, the series could end in one of three ways. 1. The Lindell Taylor strat still happens, which would probably anger Light, and that would anger Misa or something, with the latter killing him out of impulse. This leads to L to figure out Kira's location and the game begins. The FBI would be deployed, but Light would act as Misa's shield and could use his Geass to kill all of them in one fell swoop. He would do this by luring the FBI onto his trail, and then he'd have to feed Misa classified police information and, just like the original, switch up the killings, etc, etc, to show L that he has the info. This would make L think Kira is a student, and this would target Light. This is part of his plan. Ray Pember starts to track Light, but he would just Geass him into giving up the names and faces of all the other FBI agents, and then
this may be the last ad you ever see. Because with the free ad block extension from Capital One Shopping, you can say goodbye to ads.
Then tell him, Ray, to report back to his superiors on the fact that Light is innocent.
So
this would clear Light.
Basically, we would not get all just the killing scene parts, like how that girl turned over and she just like walked up the steps and she just fell to her death. On how she fell to her death. Dude caught a heart attack and by the train stop. I don't know what happened to the rest of them niggas. That's the only thing I remember. So it would have been so simple all to just get him in the room. Everybody look at him, his eyes and stuff like that, and they like that. Or get one of the dudes gonna tell him when all the names. All Misa got to do is just write their name in. And that's simple, like that's crazy.
Immediately. So they'd stop following Light Yagami, and then Light can do his next part of his plan. He'd give all the info to Misa, who would then use it to kill the agents. This would cause the police to be suspicious, especially L. And eventually, just like in the original, he tried to make contact with Light. But the moment he does, it's actually game over. Light would buy his time.
That nigga was in that nigga school? Wait a minute, I ain't see what episode that was. That must was season 2.
Confirm that L is really who he says he is, like in the original where L tells Surichiro blah 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 and Surichiro goes, that's the real L, kind of thing. You can do something like that. And he'd wait until L spends time alone with him. He could then use his Geass to make L give up his real name and a picture of his face. And from there, it's literally raps. He could also set it up so he can
hold up, the Geass, you gotta get somebody like face and name? That's wait, for real? You gotta give up your face and name? You get killed? That's crazy, bro.
Kira, or just force L to tell the task force that he was wrong and Light is completely innocent. Either way, Light could either kill L, turn him into a pawn, or just make him prove to the others that he's innocent. With this, it's pretty much raps for the world. Light has Geass, Misa's eyes, and the notebook, and with Geass, he can manipulate anybody he wants into being his pawn. It wouldn't take long for the world to accept Kira. 2. Light continues his reign at the top, but he gets tired of Misa and decides to kill her. He wouldn't have been warned by Rem prior, as he never insinuated that he would kill Misa, so the moment Light uses his Geass and orders her to die, Rem would immediately just kill him. This is assuming that Light gets tired of Misa and wants her out of the way, so that he can pass off the notebook to someone more tolerable. 3. If Kira actually does take over the world, this would lead to Nier and Mello intervening, and Light might actually lose. Defeating L so easily made Light's ego grow by an abnormal amount, and he severely underestimated the two. But if it somehow ends up with the Yellow Box Warehouse confrontation, he could honestly just use Geass to just convince Nier and the SBK to die. So it depends on whether or not you think Light grows complacent and cocky. If he does, his ego will be his eventual downfall, but if he stays sharp and locks in, the world is basically his. Outcome B. The pre-established convergence point in this what if involves Light's realization that he can't just go around using Geass to kill people. However, the Geass's absolute obedience can be used for something else, controlling the world from within. Light was already a once-in-a-generational talent who could go up against and consistently outsmart L, who quite literally is the smartest person in the world. All he'd have to really do is just lock in with his studies and get a degree in politics, and from then on, he could slowly make his way to the top. Light could use his Geass to pull a number of strings, and within the next few years, he'd be the record-breaking youngest prime minister of Japan at age 25. He would have the nation at his fingertips, and from here, he can practically do anything he wants. If he desires to have a totalitarian regime, with Geass, he can make it possible. L wouldn't even be able to touch, let alone kill Light, as he's far too much of an influential figure. As long as he keeps his record clean, he'll be a golden boy in the eyes of the law. L can suspect Light all he wants, but Geass is untraceable invisible and can't physically be seen. Even if L somehow decided to make physical contact with Light and make the daring assumption that he's behind the murder and manipulation of countless high-profile individuals, Light can just use his Geass to make L off himself, or even turn him into a slave due to his brains, which could be useful. If Light decides to use the Geass to rule the world, there is quite literally nobody that can stop him. An example would be if Light just has a single NATO summit authorized by him, followed by Light Yagami commands you to accept my supreme authority as the one and only world leader. Make this known amongst your followers, who will now be under my control, or something similar. And with that, it's basically GG's. It's GG's for the verse. This honestly might be the better alternative rather than taking risks to kill petty criminals when Light can kill tens of millions of them at the top. Even if Light doesn't immediately decide to take out criminals worldwide, he could just start small in Japan, use his influence and network to hire the best killers in the industry and Geass them into becoming his personal death squad. In less than a month, the amount of criminals in Japan will virtually be zero, and Light will make it known that anyone who steps out of his line and supreme authority will receive the death penalty. By ruling through force, Light is making Japan far more squeaky clean than it was before, and then he can go on to rule the world. So in summary, Light is honestly better suited to have the notebook, as the story was built around this object. Giving him Geass just complicates things and makes it harder, but it wouldn't be impossible depending on the approach that Light takes. If he decides to rush things, he's getting either caught by
Okay. I hope y'all enjoyed the video. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, follow our social media, pop on the screen. I see y'all when I see y'all. Lay y'all to the bottom. All right.